Welcome to the Allied Health Professionals podcast series
with your hosts Jennifer Trafford
and Alison Kerr. So welcome everyone. Today we are in the Strive at James Cook and we have with us...
I'm Jenny Winnard. I'm Group Deputy Director for Organisational Development and Culture, but I used to be a dietitian.
Fantastic. And my name's Andy Heaney. I'm the Senior Culture and Organisational Development Partner, and my background is with ED nursing, so emergency department nursing.
So some really big titles there that I'm thinking there's a lot of our people who are listening to this now are going, what is that? So what is that?
So if I start, so I've right through my career, I'm really good at getting long job titles, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I once left a job where I was a diabetes dietitian as a locum in Barnsley, and after 3 months they said to me, what is your surname? Because I tend just to say, I'm Jenny, because the job titles are huge. But basically what I do now, since the group's been formed, is I lead for organisational development, which is how we work as teams, how we work from a perspective point of view, where we might be able to be better if we're a more high-performing team, where there might be tricky issues, and also where we work culturally. So culture really I would define as, culture to me is what it's like when no one else is watching. So what makes us come to work, what makes us really happy, what is really good at work, and also the things that bug us a bit. So wrapped inside culture is how we feel that we belong, how we engage with each other, things that we might find from an experience point of view, linking with our patients, what makes it really good for a patient to come into work. So the culture is really big. One little word in that big job title, but a really big bit of it.
I love the statement there, it's how we act when nobody's watching.
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful statement, that.
Yeah.
I've often heard as well, when I'm speaking with different people across the AHP world as well, that one of the sayings that keeps coming up is that you can have as many strategies and as many plans, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's kind of what sticks with me after listening to that and thinking, yeah, if your culture's not right, you know, what hope do we have with how we move forward with any plans or strategies or anything?
Yeah, and it's like, for people who are old enough listening to have watched ER when it was on, you know, it was always that thing of you set the tone. So if you set the tone when you come to work every day. So to me, if you come into work with your head down, if you don't want to make eye contact with people, if you're clearly in an unhappy mood, that's setting a tone for the day. But actually, if you come to work and think, I'm here for a purpose, then that sets a tone, and it sets a different tone. So that's always one of my personal things, is I set the tone, and I need to set the right tone. We've got a colleague who's come up and talked to us, and he talks about what's your mood music. So what theme tune would follow you in the room. I've never yet managed to work out what my theme tune would be, but I think it's an absolutely great thing linking to culture of what is your theme tune. The closest I can get, and I'm a Crowded House fan, is 4 Seasons in One Day. But it's, you know, it's around that I'm a real person. So I think that's another really nice one as well, personally, Jen.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Andy, I know you kind of like say your job title, again, another long one. And you've just kind of stepped into this role in a bit more permanent. So what does your job title now entail, and what do you do?
So very similar to what Jenny's just said there. So senior culture lead. So I tend to lead with the programs around civility, psychological safety, human factors, all the bits that allow us to create these high performing teams. We'll talk a lot about high performing teams and understanding what creates it. And I would say the biggest part of my role is engaging with our teams, and those teams can be anywhere on that functional scale of dysfunction to high functioning. And what we see most within these teams, when what affects these teams the most, is the interpersonal skills. So within human factors, we often talk about non-technical skills. With working with me, that's a term I despise, because non-technical skills sometimes makes it sound like it's inferior to maybe the clinical skills that we have. But our non-technical skills, such as teamwork, communication, situational awareness, leadership, these are the parts of our team dynamics that if we don't get them wrong, we don't get them right, and we need to get them right, it can have a huge impact on not only the team, but when we look further down the line, patient safety. And that's probably the biggest part of my role, is ensuring that we have this culture within the teams, because we know it's proven to increase patient safety.
I think that's the key, isn't it? When we're looking at this stuff, it's linking it to back to our patients. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's always an element of, I think you said it, I want to come to work and just enjoy being in my work and not feel like it's a burden to get up on a morning and come into work. And yes, that's an aspect of it. But when it links to our patients, actually, when we look at the big reports that go on, this is the stuff that them reports talk about predominantly, isn't it? So it is really important.
It is, and I think for me, some of it, sorry I just cut across Andy, but it's around your power of communication. So what I always said clinically about being a dietitian, and I know with COVID this changed, I learned how to vaccinate and gave lots of injections, but if I take that side of my career to one side, dietetics is the career where we talk. So we don't prod and we don't poke, we talk. So we take lots and lots of technical information, and people who do tube feeding and work in intensive care, they've got lots of very technical skills. But then what we do with those skills is we talk. So we explain to patients and we explain to colleagues why we're doing things and why we're doing things in a different way. And if I look back through my career, that's probably one of the big reasons why I ended up moving out of clinical. Because to me, it's all about perspectives and that ability to communicate. And it's one of the really hard things as well. And this comes straight back into culture. But if you don't talk to each other, if you don't try and look at what a full 360 perspective is on things, that's where we end up having all sorts of issues. That's where we end up with issues for our patients. Because to me, one of the biggest powers of the AHP is as you start to move through your career, and I don't think this is all greatest, I think it's as you start to really settle into your role, you start to see more than just the bit of your straight clinical practice. You start to see what the next AHP's got for that patient care, and into what the nursing role is, and into what the medical role is. And to me, perspective's just so important as an AHP. And that is the culture. And if we can get the perspective wider on our patients, then we're happier at work every day.
So do you think, from an allied health professional's point of view, because a lot of our AHPs work within smaller teams within bigger teams within bigger teams, so do you think that culture is different, harder, easier? How does that work for our allied health professionals?
I think it's really different as an AHP. One thing I've always looked at is the fact that as you qualify as an AHP, you come in and you're a fully autonomous practitioner. So that care of that patient is yours. So we sit in a very different place from professions that are more hierarchical, because it is up to us. So if I'm the Band 5 dietitian just qualified, that feeding regime is up to me. I don't have to cross-check it with anyone. That's me. That's what I'm doing. So then sat within that team, I'm set with, well, this is what I'm doing and I know what I'm doing. But then actually, I need to make sure I can share that and lift that. And when I did my Masters, when I first moved into a leadership role, part of the role was that I had to do a Masters. So I did leadership and service improvement. And what my research was on the leadership power within the MDT of an AHP. And what was really, really interesting is within the MDTs, whether we realise it or not, and it's not linked to grade, we sit there and we lead because we advocate for our patients. And we might be looking with one angle, but we'll be thinking about the bloods for the patient, or we'll be thinking about the conditioning of the patient. If we look at within theatres, the ODPs, you're looking at the breadth of what's happening in that theatre situation. So I think one of the untapped things for an AHP is our leadership skills. And I think people regularly don't realise the strength, and I've always looked at it as, to me, it comes from, we are empowered through our training to be autonomous, and I think that's what brings the difference.
Yeah, I've noticed a difference stepping out of my clinical role into a wider AHP role, that the culture does seem to be different. Even though we're still silo working, there is an element when I'm having conversations with wider teams that I feel like there is that element that unites us across the AHPs as well. Yeah. So it's really powerful.
I think there's something really important within that when it comes to especially the AHP experience as almost a solo worker within a team dynamic, and we often talk about psychological safety, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later on in the podcast, but I think it's really important to highlight the very first stage of psychological safety, which is really empowering to teams, is inclusion safety. And if you think about the AHP, who may be that lone worker, and how important it is for the team that they are part of but don't really belong to allow that inclusion into that team, and the greatness of psychological safety and especially inclusion safety is that you are then able to ask those questions, be able to go and look for help when you need it. And I think this may be where we sometimes see dysfunction within teams, when we don't allow our outliers to be part of our, what we would class as team one, really, wouldn't we? And then that sometimes that can lead to that, decrease in patient safety, because what we're looking at really is the individual experience rather than everything through the patient safety lens. What is this AHP who's coming, whether it be a dietitian, whether it be a physio, a occupational health therapist, whatever the role is, we need to look at the positive impact that outline may be bringing to that team, and what can we do to help.
And I think it links to the trust with that as well,
Yeah.
because there's a lot to me on trust and psychological safety and culture, that and it's two sides. It's for the wider MDT to trust the power of the AHP voice, and it's the trust of the AHP to not have to feel that they're being brave advocating for their patient. And I think that's one of the things that really links into psychological safety, that our value, I think, is really, really important, and it's making sure that people feel valued and they feel heard, and that links straight back to a patient, and I think that was where I found my AHP voice, because I wanted my patient's voice to be heard. And personally, starting off really quite shy in the whole NHS system, advocating for my patient was the way I found my voice.
Yeah, I think the hierarchical working that we see in some other professions, that kind of goes out the window a little bit, because you are advocating for the patient. So I remember when I was working as a radiographer, and it doesn't matter what grade you are, you question what's happening in that room. And I do think that is different sometimes with the professions, and you are being brave. You have to be brave, but you shouldn't have to turn up every day and be brave to just do your job the best of their ability.
It's very interesting that we talk about bravery, and what we really are talking about is being vulnerable. And when we step into that space of, I'm going to either challenge or contribute, you are at that very moment quite making yourself vulnerable to potential backlash, to maybe humiliation, being shut down. And as team members, we have to recognise when people are stepping up, or as we would sometimes spend stepping into the arena, that we reward that and don't punish it, because the minute we punish that person never shows vulnerability again. They stay silent, they go into the background, they go into the shadows. Especially, and we talk about this hierarchical infrastructure, which definitely still exists, and we often talk about old power versus new power, and we understand that the more we shorten that hierarchy, the more that we allow the person with the least amount of influence or the least amount of authority to hold a conversation with the person with the most amount of accountability and authority, then that's where true psychological safety exists. That's where you truly feel empowered as an individual, and as Jenny said a few times, it's about empowering, about allowing people to be their natural selves.
So you've mentioned psychological safety a few times.
I do that often.
And a lot of us will know what you're talking about, but there'll be some people out there that are not sure what that actually is. So how would you explain, in a nutshell, what psychological safety is? Big ask there.
Psychological safety, it is, I wouldn't say it's a new term, it's certainly one we're getting used to, especially within the NHS. But psychological safety, in its essence, is your ability to have a debate, your ability to have opinions and share opinions, ideas, give and receive feedback, ask questions. But the idea of psychological safety is you're able to do this without fear of repercussion or humiliation. But if you break it down into its real essence, I can ask you a question and you don't make me feel stupid about asking that question. Why are you asking me that question? I've answered that question before. The minute we start to do that and we provide psychological danger, that's the minute we start to see the adverse effects on patient safety. So remember psychological safety using a model developed by Tim Clark in its 4 stages. We include people at a very base level, and that's just as a human being, you know, I want to be part of this team, include me as part of this team. And then we move on to learner safety, so I can ask questions, I can step up. If I do something wrong, I won't be hauled over the coals for it. We handle failure well. At the Trust now, we're going through this restorative and just learning culture, which is a perfect way to deal with when things go wrong. But to get a kind of climate assessment on an organisation, look at how they handle failure, look how they handle when things go wrong. That tells you a lot about an organisation. Then the 3rd stage is contribution safety. Now, we can probably remember the first time somebody invited us to the table to contribute. How does that feel when somebody lets you contribute, lets you share your opinions and ideas? It's really empowering and it lifts you up a little bit. You want to do some more. You want to almost reward the person for bringing you to the table. And then finally, and this is where we see real innovation and creativity, it's the challenger safety. And this is one that teams sometimes struggle with, especially when they have got the old power hierarchical infrastructure in place. And it's really important in healthcare because this is where things really go wrong when it comes to patient safety. And that's my ability to challenge you or to challenge the status quo. Why are we doing this? You know, and if you take, for example, if there is something going wrong in a clinical situation, let's say a scrub nurse sees something going wrong, are they able to stop and halt and challenge? Or if we are about to engage with some intervention and maybe the junior doctor sees something going wrong and he wants to hold up and challenge, how will that be handled? I think creating challenger safety not only provides innovation and creativity, but it allows for further team development and that real increase in patient safety. Because everything you see, like you mentioned earlier, the reports, the CQC reports, any interactions tend to be based around culture. And it's that the culture was just wrong. We knew something, it's a really classic line from the Francis report, we knew something was going wrong, but we were frightened to challenge because we knew what would happen.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's all those different types of challenger safety. So challenger safety can be, but why? Asking the question. Challenger safety can also be putting a hand on someone's shoulder and saying, are you okay? You know, and it's 2 very different types of challenger safety. Both of them take bravery.
Absolutely. So we've talked about culture and psychological safety, and so from the point of view of the staff out there, allied health professionals and all of our staff that are out there, what do we provide as a Strive facility to help embed them topics that you have started talking about?
So I can talk more on kind of the deliverables and exactly what we do within our team area. So I think the biggest impact we ever have is when we have full teams, and when we do have that full team engagement, whether that be a small team or a large collaborative team, we will take teams away. And these can be, again, really high performing teams, because we think about that 1% increase in performance can be the difference. But it can also be our more dysfunctional teams who need some help to just get back on the right track. And generally what we'll do is talk about workshops around culture, around psychological safety, civility, human factors, all the things that make great teams. So we'll talk about how do we communicate to the team and how do we treat each other within that team. And these are all workshop based as well, so it's not just boring old me lecturing people at the front. We really get these as interactive sessions, but we also incorporate OD interventions, so organisational development, which looks at process and also development and design of what we do. But we'll also bring in things such as psychometric profiling. So we utilise insights lights. People will often have heard of people talking about colour preferences and how they lead with certain colours. And what we find is that this kind of programme of learning and development as a team, we understand what behaviours we shouldn't be doing, what behaviours we should be exhibiting. We then understand how we should talk and communicate with each other, you know. And I think what I need to highlight in this part is what psychological safety is not. And it's not a appeasement, it's not a shield from accountability, it's not non-empathetic reassurance, you know, it's not a soft touch. Psychological safety isn't about being nice, it's about creating an area of, we can be kind and we can be caring, but it can also be very uncomfortable, because what we do is we talk about the uncomfortable conversations. So we'll do all this culture work and we'll get the team really well developed, and then, you know, we'll look at the psychometric profiling where we understand, and Jenny mentioned perception quite a lot earlier on. How we perceive the world is so completely different, and we forget that sometimes. And sometimes this is where teams break down when it comes to culture, is that I just don't get what you're saying, and I don't get why you can't see what I'm saying. And this is what Insights is really good at. We understand that some of us have, like myself and Jenny, we have very extroverted energy, and we want to engage face to face constantly, and how we challenge may be, for some people, a little bit overbearing, and then we understand that some of us utilise our introverted energy and we like to think things through rather than jumping in at the deep end. So this kind of combination of training really addresses the baseline culture of teams. But there's other things we can do as well. So we offer generic sessions on human factors. We've just developed an amazing full day embedding human factors into healthcare module that Jen has worked really hard on, and it's amazing. And this takes our non-clinical and clinical teams and understands all those, and we base it on some video-based scenarios as well, which is fantastic. So yeah, we offer so much that's driving. I've worked across the country, and I've never seen, and this is bigging up the Stride, and I apologise, but I say this often, I've never seen a trust offer so much to development, whether that be in leadership, whether that be in quality improvement, or whether it be in culture. I think, you know, we're very lucky here.
And what we do is we offer it for everybody. So when we built this 5-6 years ago, my aim was that we have a leader in every seat. So again, it's back to what I've been saying about this is not gradist. So every single one of us leads. You know, we have porters taking patients, they are leading for that patient at that point in time. None of this is around, I can only access this because I'm Dr. this, Mr. that. We have 4 immersive simulation suites in the Trust, which is quite rare to have so many. But what they do is you can come and you can do team training where it can be filmed, you can be working with our simulation equipment, which is all set up, if no one's seen it before, to be like a real baby, like a real toddler, like a real child, like a real adult. We work through what it would be like in a major trauma. We train 200 medical students a year, and because of that we've got the ability, and we've got such good lecturing teams, that we can provide really good team training. That links in with everything Andy was just talking through. And that allows us to be able to watch ourselves and see how we work in different areas. We also provide training from having difficult conversations, looking at what our biases are, conscious and unconscious bias. We have leadership training, so that is the names of this is all going to be changing over the next year, but the first day of leadership training is about yourself. And as we've moved into the group, and North Tees have a lovely name for that, they also have the first day is about you as a leader, and they call it Starts With You, which I think is such a good name. So expect everyone at South Tees, so that'll be the name for the one across the group. But the first day is around you. The second day then is around you in a team. would be around you looking to becoming a team lead role. So if you're starting to think about, this is like something I want to start to look at, apply for that second day training. The third one is then around you in a more senior role. So it could be you moving, if it's nursing, the analogy would be moving into a sister role, but moving into that higher level of team leadership role. After that, we offer, and all of this is free, we offer training that is linked through CPD funding, but we do offer it for people without CPD funding. So we've got Dare to Lead, which I think is one of the best things we've ever done. And this, for people who don't know, links to Brené Brown. Now, Brené's whole theory is around brave leaders. And Andy referenced it before around being in the arena. It's the person who is brave enough to stand up and try. Because if we don't stand up and try, we're not moving forwards. One of my premises when I moved here and took an education role up was I've only got to where I've got to because of the education I managed to access. So how I moved through clinical roles, when I got my master's degree, and also my thing has always been, and people often frowned at me, was that we're one person. So we're not someone at home and someone at work. So when Andy was talking about, there's different things going on for people, some of that could be that something's happened at home that actually is really influencing on what happens at work, and that's the thing that Brené Brown takes us to, that we're one person. So that training is excellent. And then we also offer for our more senior team, but this is again by senior team in terms of you're in a wider leadership role, something called human performance practitioner, and this is coaching leadership. So how do I walk alongside someone to ensure that we produce a better job, that it's better when we come to work, we're happier coming to work, because the outcome of all of it is if we work better together, our patient cares a lot better. So the offer is really broad.
So I have two follow-up questions. The first one is how do people access this kind of stuff that you have been talking about? And then the second one is, you talked a lot there about the group. Mm-hmm. How is this looking across the group?
I'll do the first one first. So everything's on the South Tees Events webpage. You need to get yourself an account to book anything. But you go in and you book through the South Tees Events webpage for South Tees staff. For things that we're opening up to the group, absolutely, you don't have to be a South Tees employee, it just works off your email address. You can access and book a place on a course. What we're going to be spending the next year doing is looking at what we offer at South Tees and what we offer at North Tees, looking at all of the evaluation, because none of this is about one trust is better than the other. What we have to look at is how things evaluate, and as courses evaluate and as we learn what each trust is doing, that's then where we'll make decisions about what we put on that's joint. But what we've got to remember is we're still two trusts. So there will still be things for each trust that are bespoke to those trusts that will have come out of those CQC reports, etc., and they'll carry on. One thing that I'm looking at bringing in for the group, and it links beautifully to what we're talking about today, is cultural awareness training. So we had our first EDI conference in November, and we had Mr. Arjit Abraham speak from Barts, who's their Executive Director for Culture and EDI. And what they've done at Barts is they've brought in cultural awareness training. And what we're trying to do is access everything that Barts do rather than reinvent something and then bring that in. So that will be the first thing that is new and that is for the group. And things will be delivered at one site or another, and we're just going to work it through over the next year. So over the year, people will start to see changes, Jen.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I think there's a lot of talk about working as a group, and I think there's a lot of different mixed feelings, but I think when we've been doing the podcast and talking to people, there is that excitement about how well we can work together and accessing the skills that North Tees have and the skills that South Tees have. And I think as the Strive team, and I've accessed loads of courses, Data Lead, I mean, I could go on about Brené Brown for the whole podcast. But I think it's really important people access it, and if there is any anxieties about the group work and how we're working, access these courses, build your skills, ask questions, and keep learning, because at the end of the day it's going to be really good us all coming together and working, and we just need to keep ourselves informed.
So any final thoughts before we close the podcast off?
I have one final thought, and I mentioned it at this morning's meeting, didn't I, about today the 2024 Children's Word of the Year was released. And this was, I think, 40,000 kids between 6 and 14, I think, submitted their Word of the Year, or were asked what their favourite Word of the Year was. And it was kindness. And I absolutely love that. And I think we often talk about, we're not trying to be nice, we're trying to be kind. Because I think sometimes with nice, it's a bit nothingness. It's like anyone can pretend to be nice, or they can put a mask on to be nice. But I think with kindness, and this is what I'd like to, especially anybody who's listening, is to, when we treat people with kindness, we become empathetic, and we put ourselves into their shoes, and we think about things from their perspective. And it can be incredibly difficult, and I think we always make that clear that this is not easy. You know, it's you think about what we experience on a daily basis. We think about those, you know, whole principles of human factors of hungry, alone, lonely, late, tired, toilet. And it can be so hard to step into that space, to be kind. But I think even if our children can understand the importance of kindness, I think we need to understand it in our teams as well. So yeah, I think that was a really poignant when I was listening to Radio 4 this morning on the way to work. I'm a geek, sorry.
Puts a smile on your face, though, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. And I would just add into that, everyone to remember that we set the tone.
Yeah.
So what is your mood music?
I think that's a lovely place to end the podcast. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I have really enjoyed spending time talking to you both, and appreciate the work that you are doing.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. We'll have to schedule another podcast in for a few months' time to see how everything's going with the rollout of the new programmes.
Brilliant. Good luck.
Look after yourselves.
And each other.